I've ordered a complete strategic review of our policy toward the rogue regime in Iran. That review is now complete. Today I am announcing our strategy, along with several major steps we are taking to confront the Iranian regime's hostile actions and to ensure that Iran never, and I mean never, acquires a nuclear weapon. Our policy is based on a clear-eyed assessment of the Iranian dictatorship, its sponsorship of terrorism, and its continuing aggression in the Middle East and all around the world. Iran is under the control of a fanatical regime that seized power in 1979 and forced a proud people to submit to its extremist rule. This radical regime has raided the wealth of one of the world's oldest and most vibrant nations and spread death, destruction, and chaos all around the globe.
We are led by very, very stupid people. And to have a president who's respected by Putin, who's respected by Iran.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. He has been very threatening beyond a normal statement. And as I said, they will be met with fire, fury, and frankly power, the likes of which this world has never seen before. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
States has great strength and patience. But if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary. That's what the United Nations is all about. That's what the United Nations is for. Let's see how they do.
Let me tell you, the one that matters is me. I'm the only one that matters, because when it comes to it, that's what the policy is going to be. You've seen that. You've seen it strongly.
We are concerned that the President of the United States is so unstable, is so volatile, has a decision-making process that is so quixotic that he might order a nuclear weapon strike that is wildly out of step with U.S. national security interests.
You are listening to TMI for the week of November 27th, 2017. This week, Dave speaks with Dr. Helen Caldicott about her new book, Sleepwalking to Armageddon. Pick it up at Amazon, Indigo, Chapters, or your favorite bookstore. And if you're Canadian, then it's cold, eh?
Dr. Helen Caldicott is the author of the new book, Sleepwalking to Armageddon. Her publisher, The New Press, writes, the world's leading spokesperson for the anti-nuclear movement, Dr. Helen Caldicott is a co-founder of Physicians for Social Responsibility, a nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize, and a 2003 winner of the Lenin Prize for Cultural Freedom. Both the Smithsonian Institute and Ladies' Home Journal have named her one of the most influential women of the 21st century. In 2001, she founded Nuclear Policy Research Institute, which later became Beyond Nuclear in Washington, D.C. The author of The New Nuclear Danger, War in Heaven, Nuclear Power is Not the Answer, and Loving This Planet. The editor of Crisis Without End and Sleepwalking to Armageddon. She is also currently president of the Helen Caldicott Foundation, nuclearfreeplanet.org. She divides her time between Australia and the United States. I know her from a radio show and many presentations in various cities recorded and posted all over the internet. She gives speeches and presents at meetings and hearings. She writes articles, does media spots, and engages on social media. She has written literally a pile of books. A Desperate Passion, Nuclear Madness, Loving This Planet, Crisis Without End, The New Nuclear Danger, Missile Envy, Nuclear Power is Not the Answer, and most recently, Sleepwalking to Armageddon. So your book was released to the public and for sale in November.
Yep.
Wow. I like the front cover.
Yes, it's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Pretty arresting.
It is. The Scream from 1893.
Yep.
So things that have been happening with Trump add to this whole concern about sleepwalking to Armageddon.
Yes, well, I wrote the introduction about that we're in the hands of a man baby, really, who's, I would doubt that he's ever read a book. He knows simply nothing about international politics or history. He's tempestuous, vindictive, sometimes irrational. He lies. And he's the only one in America who can press the button, the only person. And people are so worried in Congress, they're trying to pass a law that Congress has to authorize a nuclear war before the president can do it, but they fail to do that. And it just is beyond my imagination that the world has been wired up like a ticking nuclear time bomb or grenade ready to go off any minute, authorized by the President of the United States. And it was set up by politicians and scientists and physicists. Stupid, stupid, stupid men.
Right. Did they get anywhere in, I think they were proposing a law to limit his ability or add some layers?
They were, but it didn't work. They didn't pass the law.
You'd think that would be in everybody's interest.
Well, you know, let alone the flowers and the trees and the algae and the crustaceans and the cats and the dogs and the tigers and lions, everything. We're talking about the end of most of the creation, the end of maybe the only life in the universe. That's what we're talking about. Destroyed by E=mc² and the power and energy inside the center of the sun.
After you wrote the introduction, things have continued to spiral seemingly out of control, at least with North Korea and their rhetoric between Kim Jong-un and Trump. Were you surprised that it just continues to get worse and worse?
I'm not. My brother Richard Bronowski wrote a chapter in the book about North Korea. He was the ambassador in South Korea, the Australian ambassador for some years. And the story is very different from what you get from the mainstream media. In 1953, I think it was, the war ended between North and South Korea. America totally bombed North Korea flat. I don't know how many, 5 million people I think it killed, and there was not a brick left standing. So that's their background history. America never signed a peace treaty with North Korea, only an armistice agreement, which means nothing. What North Korea has been begging for many years is a solid peace treaty, 1. 2, a non-aggression treaty. 3, the ability to trade freely with the rest of the world. And indeed, it was during Clinton's era that he and others arranged, and I can't remember the name of the treaty, a treaty that America would give, North Korea 2 light water nuclear reactors and sell them heavy oil, which they require. And North Korea has said if America signs a peace treaty with them and starts trading with them and recognizes them, they will stop making nuclear weapons and delivery systems. So it's all there, except that the Pentagon finds North Korea extremely useful because every year for many, many years, the Pentagon has huge military exercises just south of the 38th border, along with Japanese and South Korean troops. And they practice decapitating Pyongyang, which means destroying it and destroying Kim Il-sung. And he's realized from history that if you have nuclear weapons, you don't get treated like they treated Gaddafi in Libya and killed him, and Saddam Hussein. And so it kind of makes him a little invulnerable, because if America attacked North Korea, of course he could destroy Seoul or Guam or Tokyo, and that inhibits what America would do. But it's interesting to me that many days the generals in the Pentagon play war games on their computers, and often it's North Korea invading South Korea, and what happens? Well, it always ends in nuclear war. So that's the background to North Korea, and America is totally responsible for what's happening and could solve it over probably a weekend.
I think people who just pick up the news here and there think that Clinton made a deal with North Korea to sort of contain them, gave them money and oil, and now they're back to their old tricks. But you're suggesting...
that's because during the Bush era, that treaty was violated,
right.
and he called them the axis of evil. So they said, well, stuff you, we'll make nuclear weapons. It's inevitable. The psychology between the so-called nuclear warriors is childlike. It's like the age of 3 or 4. You did that to me, well, I'll do it to you. Instead of growing up emotionally and intellectually and understanding how to negotiate and make friends with people.
Right. The deal with Iran seems to be turning upside down under Trump. Is that a good thing?
I think the whole world supports that deal with Iran, and everybody, including the UN, said Iran has not violated it. Somehow Trump has a bee in his bonnet about Iran, and I have no idea why, because he doesn't understand very much. The hawks who sit with him in his cabinet room, including that dreadful guy Bannon.
Yeah. I have a theory that he's just undoing anything previous governments have done, whether they're good things to undo or not.
Yeah. It's not a theory, it's a fact.
Right.
I mean, he's appointed a person to every single department to purposefully decimate the department. In fact, he's decimating the infrastructure of America. It's absolutely terrifying, and I don't think many Americans really appreciate what's happening behind their backs, so to speak.
Right. In 1989, when the war was unfolding in Bosnia, I thought that was a bizarre moment, because here NATO was bombing a former Warsaw Pact area. Recently, there was the war in Ukraine, and essentially we had nuclear reactors in a conventional war theater. And these are bizarre twists. I mean, even Trump being supposedly in bed with the Russians, for a country that feared communists above all else, now turning a blind eye to their president being tied with Russia. Well, all these things are just, they don't fit the pattern of what we've been expecting. It seems more and more chaotic.
That's true, and there are 15 nuclear reactors in the Ukraine, including Chernobyl. Say no more. So you really can't have a conventional war in the country armed with nuclear power plants. If the Second World War was fought today in Europe, Europe would be uninhabitable for the rest of time.
Right.
So it's terribly, terribly dangerous. Incidentally, what's happening in the Ukraine was a coup orchestrated by the right-wing neo-conservatives in the State Department, Victoria Nuland, Robert Kagan, and others. And if you read the book, there's a wonderful article by one of your best journalists, Robert Parry, writing about the history of the Ukraine. So America set that whole thing up. And, I can't tell you how angry that makes me feel. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And it's very clear that America needs wars, because your economy is virtually run by the military-industrial complex, and $1 trillion of your money per year, tax dollars, goes to killing. And if there are no wars, they can't make bombs, you know. There's no reason to have bombs and planes and missiles and the like.
They're about to refurbish their nuclear stockpile in the United States and spend...
Yeah, they call it modernization. They're going to replace every single nuclear hydrogen bomb, missile, plane, submarine, ship, with new ones over 30 years to the tune of $1.7 trillion. This is obscene. And this is why we call the book Sleepwalking to Armageddon. Indeed, most Americans have no idea what's going on. And, you know, it's Black Friday. They're all rushing in to consume this, that, and the other, and worrying about gourmet food and what they ate at Thanksgiving, while failing to face the future, well, that there may be no future. And my question would be, as a pediatrician who spent her life trying to save the lives of children, do you love your children? Do you care about their future?
Let me ask you this. You know, as a pediatrician, we're watching a generation of young people that are growing up with their phones in their hands. They can't walk a dog or cross the street without staring at their phone at every possible second. My first question would be like, is there an increase in depression amongst that cohort?
I haven't read the literature on that. I don't know, but it's certainly, instead of making true friends with eye-to-eye contact and having arguments and fights and love-ins and the whole thing, they're dealing with inanimate objects. And in a funny way, you know, I went to the toilet just now, my boyfriend's just broken up with me, here's a picture of me naked, this sort of thing, which is really, it's not about life at all. And yes, it's very, very worrying. Apart from that, there are these hideous, violent videos that they watch, really violent. And it's Hollywood that's doing that. And Hollywood works very, very closely with the Pentagon. So if they make good films that the Pentagon likes, they're allowed to use the Pentagon planes and aircraft carriers and the like. The whole thing is beyond sick. It's evil and deeply, deeply disturbing, and leads to only one conclusion I can only draw, which is annihilation of life on the planet.
When the title is Sleepwalking to Armageddon, when I imagine sleepwalking, that's what I imagine are these people everywhere, in the elevator, on the street, again, crossing the road, driving, you name it, with that glowing brick in their hand. And I've had quite a few debates about this. Some people say this new generation is armed with all the information in the world's ever known at their fingertips, and young people are usually on the right side of issues, and that it could enable activism and engagement for this generation in a way that other generations haven't had it. But again, all I see people, I saw somebody open the door to their house and open the door, step out onto the step and towards the sidewalk, and never once their eyes came off the screen. And they could have been using the phone inside before. Like, so that's the sleepwalking I imagine.
Yes, and also the stuff there's such a variety of material now on the internet. You can choose what you want to read, and most of them, I'm sure, don't read what they need to read about their future. Of course, many of young people are deeply concerned about global warming, as well they should be. And it's terribly interesting, too, the way women have responded to Trump et al. So many have been motivated to run for Congress and the like, which is absolutely wonderful, because the men have totally stuffed it up. They've created, a potential global gas oven, both with global warming and nuclear war. And it's time the women stepped in, because we're 52% of the population. We're smarter than most men. Our corpus callosum is bigger than men, in that there's a greater and larger connection between the right and left brain. We go with our intuition. We're emotionally more mature than most men. And it's time we just smacked their bottoms and said, okay, move, we're taking over now, because you've really screwed up.
You've mentioned in some of your speeches the idea of a male reptilian midbrain. I think you mentioned you might write a book about it one day.
Yeah, the reptilian midbrain. Yeah. Well, in fact, I was going to write a book called Why Men Kill and Why Women Let Them, but I've decided I won't do that now. But the neurons in the hippocampus that are responsible for orgasm and violence in the mammalian male brain are very close together, and in fact, in some instances, they overlap. And the experiments done with rats and mice and other mammals show that they interdigitate. In other words, rats can be turned on by females sexually, but also violence can turn them on sexually. And that's both violence and orgasms are responsible for the release of dopamine, that lovely feeling you get after an orgasm, and also violence. So it's clear violence is very closely associated in men with sex. And you see that with Harvey Weinstein and others who are really very belligerent and aggressive towards women, and it turns them on, obviously. And I think this needs to be explored very deeply from a physiological perspective.
It's in a previous episode, two, kind of liberal guys sit down to have as an enlightened conversation we can possibly have about these revelations that have been coming out recently. I've always thought it was a biochemical difference between men and women, and I'm starting to wonder if it's really more a story about power. So
it's neurological.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I explained, it's neurological, but also, I think power comes into it too. And mansplaining, and men, they don't listen to women, they talk over us, which gives me the shits, I can tell you. And now that I'm nearly 80, I won't put up with it. I just devastate the man who's trying to do that to me. Then I read an interesting article yesterday about how men sit with their legs wide apart and show all their stuff. And women aren't allowed to, and we've got no stuff to show. Yeah. So it's time we sat with our legs apart too. And, because if you look at men, you can often see outlines of their penis and testicles. Yeah. And we've got nothing to show.
Or we can go topless.
What?
We can go topless. Men.
Topless?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. It's a complex issue. My point was that, even when two guys sit down to try to talk about the power, we still don't get it because we've never been in that position ever. And so when I'm just in my own defense, I'm just saying that, even when you try to understand, you still won't unless you've been dominated by a boss who's taking advantage of the situation and their power. It's whistled at when you walk down the road, all of that. And my sort of what I keep wondering is, will that ever change, or no matter what, we're always going to be faced with this, and that women have to rise.
Wimpish. Women, often I'll give a talk, and in America they don't give you much space, so they crowd around, and a man will say something, and I say, "That's a great idea. You should run for Congress." And he says, "Yeah." And a woman will come up with a great idea, and I'll say the same thing to her. She literally takes 2 steps backwards and says, "Who, me?" So we need to get in touch with our power and our authenticity and confidence and just step forward and take over.
I always thought nuclear and stuff should be a woman's issue. You guys, I agree with what you say, that you do seem more rational in situations and dealing with power. I guess more and more women run for office. We're taking baby steps, I think, in the right direction. It's just, will we take them fast enough?
Baby steps is not fast enough. Yeah. And the magic number is 30%,
right,
below which representation in any organisation, women vote to please the men. Above 30%, there's such mutual reinforcement that the women say we're voting and they take on the men. So there needs to be mutual support with the women, and it goes across all political boundaries.
Right. Attacks on nuclear power plants and weapons installations. This is the thing we should be thinking about.
Well, yeah, but, people aren't unless there's an accident. There's been a release of ruthenium 106 from Mayak, probably, in Russia, and I've been looking it up because I didn't know what biological ramifications ruthenium 106 has, but it's 20 times more radiotoxic than strontium 90.
Wow.
It's a beta emitter. It emits an electron, and it's damn dangerous and carcinogenic. I don't know about the food chain if it concentrates in food, but I'm sure it does. So people need to be educated about these things, and particularly the media, so the media can educate people. But I had to do a fair bit of research just now to find out about ruthenium 106.
The mystery plume over Europe and no public disclosure about it. It's kind of a look at the future of nuclear as these totalitarian countries seem to be having a nuclear renaissance with their new builds. This is going to continue to happen. The more they build, they don't have this responsibility to disclose to the public what's going on. I think we're going to see more of this, mystery plumes.
Yeah, but it's us who are pushing these blasted reactors onto these other countries. And above and beyond that, it's the nuclear, and you should say nuclear, not nuclear, which is what George Bush, he couldn't pronounce it properly, nuclear.
I have
Nuclear
a little
waste.
Post-it note I put on my computer reminding me to get you to pronounce it nuclear.
Nuclear. So, nuclear waste, which lasts for 1 million years, must be isolated from the environment for millions of years. And we're making thousands of tons of the stuff every year. I mean, it's absolutely obscene. No one knows what to do with it. And in fact, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in America has a thing called the Waste Confidence Act, that they have confidence that in time they'll be able to work out what to do with their radioactive waste. That's how stupid the whole thing is, how absolutely insane. Will lead inevitably to epidemics of cancer, leukemia, genetic diseases, of which there are 2,600 or more, and congenital deformities, not just in humans, but animals and plants. And there's a wonderful scientist called Tim Mousseau, an evolutionary biologist, who's been studying the birds and plants and animals around the exclusion zones of Fukushima and Chernobyl, and find just those abnormalities in those animals. And what happens to animals happens to us. The birds have smaller than normal brains. 40% of the birds are sterile. They have mutations, crooked wings, white feathers, abnormalities, tumors, and the like. So that presages what will happen to humans, and indeed it did in Chernobyl. There are homes full of grossly deformed children now around Chernobyl. It's just obscene. Obscene.
Yeah. I have a question. The refurbishment of the U.S. military stockpile, the complete replacement, you said. And so my question is, after they took apart some of the weapons in the USSR, from the USSR, we didn't know what to do with the material they had extracted from these weapons. We tried to make mocks and whatever it is we're stockpiling that stuff for. When they redo the U.S. stockpile, do you know if they're going to reuse the nuclear material, or are we going to have to store? Are we going to have to store a whole new group of tons of materials taken from the old weapons?
Out of the bombs. Yeah. Well, someone said plutonium, 1 pound is enough to give everyone on Earth lung cancer. So it's pretty nasty gear, and it lasts for 250,000 years, and there's nowhere to store it safely. Someone said if you mix it with treacle, it can't be remade into bombs. But of course, treacle is water soluble and can leak, and plutonium. I don't know. It's just the whole thing is crazy, really.
Yeah. Do you think that there'd ever be a time in the future where we were sane enough to, even if you accept that we have to have 1 or 2 nuclear weapons?
No, we have to have none.
Right.
I do not accept that. It's
Okay.
medically contraindicated.
Yeah.
It's like having a reactor filled with polio virus.
Well, I think some people would be afraid that the other side might have 1 or 2, and so we would
that's
have 1 or
rhubarb.
2.
Who cares if the other side has 1 or 2?
Yeah. I like
That's
your thinking.
absolutely male thinking.
Right. Can't help it. Male over here. But let's just say we got to a point where we had a very limited stockpile of literally not the thousands, for whatever reason we have them. I mean, that would be a step forward.
Well, no, look, there's a wonderful movement now happening at the United Nations, and it's called ICAN, International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, and they've just got the Nobel Peace Prize. And they've persuaded 122 countries to agree to abolish nuclear weapons. Of course, the nuclear countries are not agreeing, but there's going to be a concerted campaign and a really big effort to get those countries to come to the party. So that's really, really interesting. And this campaign is led by young people all over the world. And I feel so relieved because I'm nearly 80 and I've spent my life trying to stop these damn things. And now, you know, the young people are stepping in. It's just wonderful, wonderful feeling for me, I have to say.
Was Ronald Reagan more sympathetic to this than Trump, do you think? Like, I mean, Ronald Reagan went ahead
when I met with Reagan, he was not very bright.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd had no influence, and he didn't know anything, really. I'd just written my book, Missile Envy, and I had to correct him a lot, and he got quite anxious. But after I left, he started to say nuclear war must never be fought and can never be won.
Right.
And he started working with Gorbachev, and 2 mere men over a weekend in Reykjavik in 1987 almost agreed to abolish nuclear weapons in Russia and America. And of course, if that happened, all the other little countries with weapons would get rid of theirs.
Right.
So it was a very interesting dynamic.
There's other, ongoing issues. Pakistan and India, they have a little arms race that's been going on for a long time.
Well, it's not little. They've got 100 to 200 hydrogen bombs each. If they use them, it would create nuclear autumn, where up to 2 billion people would starve to death because there would be so much smoke and debris elevated into the stratosphere, it would block out the sun to a large degree, and crops would fail for up to 10 years. So certainly they could have a nuclear war together. They're very volatile. But also that could bring in the superpowers, and we could have a global holocaust.
I wonder what would it take to get more people talking about these issues?
Oh, through the media. I mean, I should be on the media all over the place in America on those damn talk shows and the funny John Oliver things at night, and the things that people watch all the time. And that's the way to educate people, which is what I did in the 80s, and I did it in Canada with the film If You Love This Planet. It's just teaching people, really. It's practicing preventive medicine, which is what we try and do with our patients, teach them about their diseases and how they should live.
I'm always shocked of all these celebrities and stars and the very people who go on the shows you just described. There's only a couple who will talk about nuclear in any way at all. I wonder if their agents and managers kind of wrap them on the wrists when they get into
controversy. No, I don't
controversy.
think so. I think they don't know. I think they're ignorant. But what happened in the 80s was that I have an agent in Hollywood who represented a lot of film stars, Tom Cruise and lots of them, and she got them to appear on television with me, and therefore, I mean, no one wants to hear a boring old Australian doctor talking about
you'd be
the
surprised.
medical effects of nuclear war. It's depressing, but if you have Sally Field and Lily Tomlin and others and me, yes, they had me on, and that's how she got to millions and millions and millions of American people.
It's funny because the only time I ever feel okay is when I'm hearing people talk about these things, because I know now they're being talked about. It's really terrifying when, we're caught up in all these distractions.
Yeah.
All these distractions serve to fragment us
Yep, it's
and
called
make movement.
displacement activity.
Yeah. Your book is available on Amazon, I noticed,
Yes.
and Kohl's here in Canada. There's a store up here. There's Indigo
Sleepwalking
and
to
Chapter.
Armageddon. You're in Vancouver, right?
No, I'm in Toronto.
Oh, Toronto.
I am
Oh,
nestled,
good.
I am surrounded by nuclear power plants, Helen.
I know you are.
Bruce, Darlington,
Shut them down.
Pickering. Yeah, I'll get on that. Thank you again for coming on and bringing us up to date.
It's a pleasure.
In Sleepwalking to Armageddon, pioneering anti-nuclear activist Helen Caldicott assembles the world's leading nuclear scientists and thought leaders to assess the political and scientific dimensions of the threat of nuclear war today. Chapters address the size and distribution of the current nuclear arsenal, the history and politics of nuclear weapons, the culture of modern-day weapons labs, the militarization of space, and the dangers of combining artificial intelligence with nuclear weaponry, as well as a status report on enriched uranium and shocking analysis of spending on nuclear weapons over the years. The book ends with a devastating description of what nuclear attack on Manhattan would look like, followed by an overview of contemporary anti-nuclear activism. Both essential and terrifying, this book is sure to become the new Bible for the anti-nuclear movement, to wake us from our complacency and urge us to action.
Follow us on Twitter at ThatArcher. Rate and review us on iTunes. Listen on our webpage, tmi.twxnet.com. Send us an email, archer@twxnet.com. Slip it into cruise control and